We think we know everything about the moon. No atmosphere, no water, no life, a dead world, frozen billions of years ago, just a rock in our orbit. But in 1967, the Lunar Orbiter spacecraft photographed something else, an object casting a shadow, vertical, 2.5 kilometers high, and this photograph disappeared from public view for 40 years. To understand what happened, we need to go back 7 years, to December 1960. The Cold War is in full swing. The Soviet Union had just launched Sputnik, and America was in a panic. NASA, a young agency less than 3 years old, was preparing for the most ambitious race in human history to send a man to the moon. But before flying, one awkward question had to be answered. A question that no one wanted to ask out loud. What if we find something there? Not breed, not dust, something else. To answer this question, NASA turned to the Brookings Institution, one of America's oldest think tanks. The task sounded straightforward: to assess the social, economic and political consequences of space exploration. But hidden within the 200-page report, among the graphs and tables, was a section that would change everything. It was called The Consequences of Discovering Extraterrestrial Life. The authors of the report, sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, warned that the discovery of artifacts from another civilization on the Moon, Mars or Venus could have catastrophic consequences for humanity. They cited history as evidence. They pointed to tribes that disintegrated upon contact with more advanced cultures. They pointed to societies that lost faith in themselves when confronted with something they could not understand. And at the very end of the section, a recommendation, dry, bureaucratic, but all the more frightening for it. The authors proposed examining the question of under what circumstances information about such a discovery could be concealed from the public, and in whose interest this should be done. The Brookings report was presented to Congress in April 1961. 3 weeks later, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. 8 years later, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and the report was shelved. It lay there for 30 years, until someone started asking questions, but that was later. Meanwhile, it is February 1967. Cape Canaveral. The Atlas Agena rocket is being prepared for launch at the launch site. On board is the Lunar Orbiter 3 automatic station, the third of 5. Its task is simple: to photograph the surface of the moon in search of a landing site for future astronauts. No one expected the camera to capture anything other than craters and dust. On 5th February, the probe entered lunar orbit. The camera began operating. The film was developed directly on board, in zero gravity, under conditions for which this technology was never intended. The images were then scanned and transmitted to Earth. One of the filming locations was Sinus Media, the Central Bay. This point is almost in the very center of the visible lunar disk. It is an ideal landing site, a flat surface with minimal obstacles. The frame was given the number 84M. In the foreground is the Bruce crater. Behind it is the grey plain of the sea. And on the horizon, where the surface of the moon meets the blackness of space, the camera captured something. Vertical silhouette, thin, irregular shape, casting a shadow on the surface, an object that should not be there. The photograph underwent standard processing. It was entered into the catalogue, and it disappeared into the archives of the National Space Data Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. For 40 years, no one knew of its existence. The year is 1993. Richard Hoagland, former science consultant for CBS News, and the man who provided commentary on the moon missions for Walter Cronkite in the 1960s, is rummaging through archives. He's searching for what others have chosen to forget. Hoagland is not a scientist. He has no degree, but he has an obsession and access to the National Space Data Center. It is there that he finds frame 84M. What he sees on the horizon of the photograph makes him stop. A vertical structure, too thin for a mountain, too tall for a rock. Casting a clear shadow on the lunar surface, Hoagland begins his work. He scans, he enlarges, he adjusts the contrast, and the deeper he delves into the image, the more he sees. He calls the first object the fragment. According to his calculations, it is 1.5 to 2 kilometers high. It is an irregularly shaped structure, resembling a spire or a fragment of something larger, but this is only the beginning. Nearby, slightly closer to the camera, Hoagland discovers a second object. more massive, taller. He calls it the Tower. 7 miles, about 11 kilometers, from base to top. At the top is something resembling a cube. It is as if the tower is crowned with some kind of structure. 11 kilometers. For comparison, Everest is 8 and 8. Burj Khalifa is less than a kilometer. But that's not all. In other photographs, taken by Apollo astronauts, Hoagland finds a third object. He calls it the Castle, a structure that, according to him, hangs 14 kilometers above the surface, as if suspended in space, with something resembling a sagging cable. 3 objects. 3 impossible silhouettes in a world where there should be nothing but stone and dust. Hoagland puts forward a theory, a radical one, a crazy one if you go by official science. He says they're ruins, remains of ancient structures made of glass-like material, domes, towers, supports, all that's left of a civilization that existed long before humans came along. He says, look at the sky above the moon in the astronauts' photographs. It should be completely black, but sometimes it appears shiny, like lacquered leather, as astronaut Alan Bean described it. Hoagland claims that this is not the sky. These are the remains of giant glass domes that once covered entire regions of the moon. Dirty, broken, but still refracting light. And then he remembers the Brookings report about the recommendation to conceal information that could destabilize society. Everything fits into a picture, a frightening one, but logical if you accept his initial assumptions. NASA knew from the very beginning and kept quiet. In 2007, the book Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA was published. The authors were Richard Hoagland and Mike Barer. The book became a bestseller, reaching number 21 on the New York Times list. Millions of people learn about the photographs, about the shard, about the tower, about 40 years of silence. But there is a person who knew about this much earlier and kept quiet for much longer. The year 1971, Houston, Texas, Johnson Space Center. Ken Johnston, a former Marine test pilot and one of 4 civilian consultants for the Apollo program, works at the Lunar Sample Receiving Laboratory. His job title sounds modest, Head of Data and Photo Control. In practice, this means that everything passes through his hands. Every gram of lunar soil, every photograph taken by the astronauts, every frame shot in orbit. Johnston compiles catalogues. He packs samples for shipment to laboratories around the world. He ensures that no negatives are damaged and no signatures are lost. He is the keeper of the archives, the man who has seen everything, and one day he sees too much. Johnston enters the photo lab. It's a normal day, the usual routine. But something is wrong. A woman he doesn't know is sitting at the table. In front of her is a stack of photographs. In her hand is a brush. It paints the sky. Johnston asks what is happening. The woman responds calmly. She calls herself a stripper. Her job is to remove details that might confuse people. Stars in the lunar sky. Glare. Anomalies. Johnston looks at the photographs. In those that have already been processed, the sky is a smooth black rectangle. In those that are waiting their turn, something else is visible. Something that shouldn't be there. He doesn't ask any more questions, not on that day, but he remembers. Time passes. The Apollo program is winding down. The laboratory is closing. And then Johnston's boss, Bud Laskawa, calls him into his office. The order is simple and unambiguous. Destroy the photo archive, 5 complete sets of original photographs, 8 by 10 inches, first generation prints, closest to the original negatives. Johnston objects. He says that it is state property, that the photographs were paid for by taxpayers, that they can be transferred to universities, museums, researchers. Answer, no, get rid of them. I don't care what you think. Johnston carries out the order. Almost. He destroys 4 sets. He hides the 5th. He seals it in protective envelopes. He puts it away in a safe place. And he remains silent. 30 years. Why is he silent? Because he is a military man. Because an order is an order. Because he is not sure what he saw. Because he has no evidence. Only memories and a folder with photographs that he's not allowed to show. Or maybe because he knows that no one will believe him. In 2007, Johnston contacted Richard Hoagland. He gave him access to his archive. The photographs were scanned. They were published. They became the basis for the Dark Mission. Johnston gives an interview. He talks about the strippers. about the order to destroy the archive, about what he saw in the photographs, and what had been painted over. NASA denies everything. Official representatives call Johnston a fantasist. They point to inaccuracies in his biography. They question his qualifications, but the photographs exist, the archive exists, and the questions remain. What exactly was being retouched in the photo lab at the Johnson Space Center in the summer of 1971, and why does it still matter 36 years later? The year 2007, California, NASA Ames Research Center. Dennis Wing and Keith Cowling, engineers and space enthusiasts, stand in front of an abandoned building on the edge of the complex. It used to be a McDonald's restaurant. It closed a few weeks ago. Inside, it still smells like fried food. But Wingo and Cowling are not looking at the kitchen. They are looking at 4 giant metal cabinets that have just been brought in from a shed in the suburbs. Each one is almost 2 meters tall, almost a meter wide, 270 kilograms in weight. Covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, these are Ampex FR900 tape recorders, the last working examples on the planet, machines created to record data in an era when computers took up entire rooms. Nearby are 1,500 reels of magnetic tape, original recordings from 5 lunar orbiter probes, data that was stored for 40 years, first in NASA archives, then in a retired engineer's shed. Tapes that were almost sent for recycling. These tapes contain every photograph taken above the moon in 1966 and 1967, including frames S3 Rodamatifrem. The project is called LOIP, Lunar Orbiter Image Recovery Project, and the abandoned McDonald's, nicknamed McMoons. The problem is that technology from the 1960s is incompatible with technology from the 2000s. The tape recorders are broken, the documentation has been lost, parts have not been manufactured for 30 years. Whale blubber, a substance that is banned from sale, is needed to lubricate the heads. Wingo and Cowling are assembling a team. Retired engineers who remember how these machines worked. Students who are ready to learn on the fly. Volunteers who believe that history is worth saving. They find spare parts on eBay. They restore circuits based on 50-year-old drawings. They replace whale blubber with a synthetic substitute. And in November 2008, they get their first image. Earth above the lunar horizon, image taken by Lunar Orbiter 1 in August 1966. The first photograph of our planet from the orbit of another celestial body. But the quality is not what was published in the 60s. The original images had a resolution of 1000 to 1, but the technology of the time only allowed for 250 to 1 to be extracted. 3/4 of the information remained on the tape, invisible, inaccessible, forgotten. Now, for the first time in 40 years, the world sees the moon as the cameras saw it, without loss, without compromise. By 2014, the LOIP team will have processed all 1,500 reels. That's over 2,000 images. The data will be transferred to NASA's planetary system and made available to everyone, including Frame 384M. And here the story takes an unexpected turn. June 2009. An Atlas V rocket launches from Cape Canaveral. On board is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO, the most sophisticated spacecraft ever sent to the moon. His cameras are not from the 1960s. The resolution is 50 centimeters per pixel, hundreds of times more detailed than anything that came before, enough to see the astronauts' footprints on the surface, enough to distinguish abandoned lunar rovers and descent modules. Is it sufficient to answer the question once and for all? What is located in the sinus media area? The LRO photographs every square meter of the lunar surface, the Bruce crater, the plain behind it, the horizon where Hoagland saw his towers. The result? Nothing. No structures, no spires, no 11-kilometer towers with cubes on top, just rocks, dust, craters, geology that is 4 billion years old. The scientific community breathes a sigh of relief. Skeptics rejoice. Everything is explainable. Everything is understandable. Fragment, a development defect. Lunar Orbiter used a wet chemical process directly on board, in zero gravity. The liquid splashed around, leaving stains on the film. Hoagland enlarged one of these stains and mistook it for a structure. Tower? An image processing artifact. When you increase the contrast and apply smoothing to a grainy, low-resolution image, you can create the illusion of anything. The human brain is programmed to see patterns, even where there are none. This is called pareidolia. It's the same reason we see faces in clouds. Castle, an optical effect. Glare, possibly a scratch on the lens. Retouching photographs, standard procedure. Photographers remove defects, dust and scanning artifacts. Not alien ruins. Rubbish. Ken Johnston? His credentials are being questioned. Journalists are finding inaccuracies in his biography. His doctorate turns out to be a diploma from an unrecognised organisation. His memoirs are the only source. No documents, no other witnesses. The case is closed. The moon is dead. It always was dead. Period. But is that really the case? Critics of conspiracy theories point to an obvious paradox. If NASA wanted to hide the truth, why publish the original images? Why fund the LOIP project? Why send the LRO with cameras capable of photographing every rock? Supporters respond, that is precisely why. Modern photographs are also fake, or the structures have been destroyed, or the LRO is not photographing the right areas. There is always an explanation. There is always a but. And there are things that neither side can explain. In 1969, the Apollo 12 astronauts dropped the spent lunar module onto the moon. The impact was equivalent to a ton of TNT. Seismometers installed on the surface recorded the vibration. The moon rang out. Like a bell. 55 minutes. Dead stone does not behave this way. Scientists explain this by the dryness of the lunar crust, the absence of water, which dampens vibrations on Earth. But in 1970, Soviet scientists Vassin and Sherbakov put forward another hypothesis. The moon is hollow. It is an artificial object, a spacecraft parked in Earth's orbit billions of years ago. Madness? Of course. But 55 minutes of vibration is a fact. The explanation is an interpretation. And interpretations, as we know, change. Today we know more about the moon than ever before. We know that there is water at its poles, ice hidden in the eternal shadows of craters. We know that there are lava tubes beneath its surface, caves large enough to accommodate entire cities. We know that its far side is radically different from the visible side, thicker crust, fewer seas, a different history. Every new discovery reminds us that we know less than we think we do. The year 2026. America, China, Russia, India, all are preparing to return to the moon. The Artemis program promises to land astronauts at the South Pole. Chinese rovers are already travelling across the far side. Private companies are designing bases that will operate on extracted lunar oxygen and hydrogen. We are returning. In 50 years, we are returning. And when the new generation of explorers steps onto the lunar dust, they will be armed with cameras that can capture a speck of dust from orbit, radars capable of looking beneath the surface, instruments that the Apollo astronauts could not even dream of. They will find the answers to all questions, or they will set new ones. Because the story behind Photograph 384M is not about the moon. It is about us, about how we treat the unknown, about how easy it is to see what you want to see, and how difficult it is to accept what you do not expect. Richard Hoagland saw towers, scientists saw film defects, Ken Johnston saw a conspiracy, critics saw a fantasist. Everyone looked at the same photograph and saw different things. Which one of them was right? Maybe everyone, maybe no one. But here's what we know for sure. In February 1967, a camera at an automatic station recorded something on the horizon of the moon. Something strange enough that 40 years later, people were still arguing about what it was. The photograph has not disappeared. The tapes have not been destroyed. Johnston's archive exists, and each of you can find frame 3K in the public domain. See it with your own eyes, draw your own conclusions. NASA is not concealing these images. Today it is not concealing them. But 40 years is a long time. Long enough for technology to change. Long enough for witnesses to grow old. Long enough for the truth, whatever it may be, to dissolve in the noise of interpretations. We think we know everything about the moon, but the moon is the closest celestial body to us. 380,000 kilometers, 3 days of flight, and even it holds secrets that we are only beginning to unravel. What can we say about Mars? About Jupiter's moons? About worlds beyond the solar system? The universe does not have to be understandable. It does not have to meet our expectations. It simply exists, enormous, ancient, indifferent, and sometimes, just sometimes, it leaves shadows on its stones that we cannot explain. What does this mean for us? Perhaps nothing. A defect in the film, a play of light, a misperception, and perhaps everything. The answer is somewhere out there, 380,000 kilometers away. We have already flown there once, and we will return again. The only question is whether we are ready for what we will find.